I am the Lady Miss Vagina Jenkins, and it is time for Queer Astrology. So in this video, I want to talk about rest and how you can identify some ways to rest or strategize some ways to rest based on the holistic nature of your natal astrology chart. That's a mouthful. I'm gonna break it down. Don't worry. Okay, so what had happened was in last week's videos, due to a suggestion by YouTube user Sydney6443, I talked about how we could strategize our fitness and movement practices based on our natal astrology. And it just got me to thinking, all right, yes, to getting the energy to like move and exercise one's body, but also what about the energy to rest? How do we strategize what it looks like to rest? And from an astrological perspective. And so, yeah, that's one thing that I was thinking about. I've also been thinking about one of my favorite rest related scholars or organizers is this person called Trisha Hershey. And they run a movement, an Instagram page, a website called the Nap Ministry. And it's all about the ways in which when we take rest and are prioritizing and intentional about rest in our lives, the ways we disrupt capitalism and the hierarchy as a whole. And engaging with that work has been super important to my understanding of rest, particularly, and she talks about this in her work as well, but particularly as a person whose labor has been exploited all of my life and all of my mother's life and all of my grandmother's life and all of my great-grandmother's life, in terms of coming from a lineage of people who were enslaved and had their labor stolen from them, and being working class and being exploited for my labor. And so yeah, rest is very important to me. There are some other reasons why I think rest is something that I value so highly, but we're gonna get into that as the video unfolds. Just let me cook for a second. So when I think about rest, it's some of the theoretical framework is the same as the framework that I was thinking about when I was thinking about fitness and movement practices. I want us to understand our natal charts more holistically. And it's funny to me that I say that because you couldn't have told me when I first started making YouTube videos that I wasn't going to be doing the thing that most people do, which is like, let's look at this planet. Let's look at this planet through the 12 signs. Let's look at Mercury. Let's look at Mercury in Pisces and Mercury in Aquarius, and you know. And I don't think that's particularly useful. I think that it is more useful to understand some theoretical underpinnings so that you can look at your chart from a more holistic perspective as you're answering any particular question. So as it relates to the question of rest, I want us to understand a couple different concepts. The concept of the planetary placements and their modes, the planetary placements and their elements, and how those elements have a sort of order to them. And I also want us to understand the different houses and the different areas of life that they represent, and the different types of rest. So yeah, it's 4 different kinds of ideas, but we're gonna thread them in together into like this holistic thing. Yeah. First thing I want to talk about is the modes and the elements. So I think that it's useful to understand the dominant mode and the dominant element in your chart because it helps you understand how you tend to do things so that you can strategize different ways that you want to be. So understanding that you have a dominance of a particular mode or a particular element might help you strategize how to rest. So when I think about rest and the modes, cardinal, fixed, or mutable, I think about how cardinal signs have this intrinsic motivation and almost like a responsibility to start things, to be the spark, the spark of ideas, to be the leader, to be the boss. And so then I wonder if, as it pertains to rest, if there might be guilt around rest, and how do you move around that? I also wonder what it would be like to feel an energy of starting things all of the time, and how that also might be antithetical or at least challenging to the idea of rest, constantly starting. When I think about fixed signs, I think about inertia, the inertia of continuing to work at a thing when maybe you could be resting. Or I think about the idea of being stuck, or inertia in the other place, like we keep going or we are standing still. And so what is it like to start the practice of resting when you haven't thought about it before and feel stuck? So that's a challenge that could come up in terms of like fixed energy. I believe that mutable signs are probably the best at resting, and resting is so necessary. I think that they are probably the best at resting because they go with the flow. You know, I am a mutable sign dominant sort of person, and my experience of resting is understanding that energy waxes and wanes. And understanding that I might rest today, but that doesn't mean that the project is completely done, because I understand that my energy might look a different way tomorrow, next week, the month after that, the season after that. And so I think mutable energy is great for understanding how to go with the flow, and which I think absolutely depends on recognizing your internal energy and how that changes. So Mars sorts of energy, and the external energy, the transits that are happening in the sky, particularly sun energy, how that's sort of a external source of vitality. And we talked about that in last week's video too. And there's the idea of the elements, which I think, as I'm thinking about this, I think the elements may be probably the larger and more important, I don't know, we'll see, part of the picture, in that in traditional Hellenistic Greek astrology, the elements have a sort of order to them, and that order is based on the amount or level of energy. You know how in physics they say, like, when something's hotter, the molecules within it are actually moving faster. It's literally vibrating faster, higher. Keep that in mind, because it helps me understand that fire has the most energy. The molecules are vibrating, are moving the quickest, and water is the lowest energy. And I think about water in this context, I'm thinking about water as ice, so that I can think about it as the opposite of fire. And these are just tools that I use to help me make sense of this order. So water exists in the Hellenistic tradition. Water exists, and earth arises from water. So we're bumping up the energy one level up. Earth arises from water. Air covers the earth. So that's one level of more molecules vibrating a little faster. And then fire is sparked from air, you know, the ways in which oxygen can spark a fire. And so, yeah, that's like the stars, the atmosphere, air, earth as the planet, and water at the bottom. And I say all of these in this particular order to understand, because I think it's crucial to understand this particular order, to understand how you can increase your energy or decrease your energy if you're intentionally trying to rest. So I think that that's probably the biggest part of this picture of rest as it relates to astrology. And then there's also knowing the houses. And I'm not going to go through all of the 12 houses, but I will associate some of the houses with particular types of rest. But yeah, understanding the 12 houses as 12 different areas of life so that you can understand what the work is of each of those 12 areas of life, and then kind of its opposite. If you're not doing work, are you resting in these particular 12 areas of life? I'll talk about each of the types of rest, and then I'll talk about what houses I associate them with. So yeah, there's actual like physical rest. I think that is the first thing that comes to mind when most people think about rest, like sitting down, sleeping as a form of physical rest. So physical rest, number one. Number two, mental or cognitive rest. 3, emotional rest. 4, sensory rest. 5, creative rest. 6, social rest. And 7, spiritual rest. And in all of these ways, I want to associate them, all of those ways of rest are really, really interesting to me. And I also want to associate them with particular houses so that we can sort of strategize rest in these particular areas of life. So when I think about physical rest, I think about the first house and the sixth house. The first house because it's like our identity and how we navigate the world. I often liken it in the example of like walking the path of life, that our rising sign is how we walk the path. Whereas like in the big three, the sun is what we're sort of aiming to, what illuminates the path, and the moon sign is what we need to feel safe in the walking of the path. But yeah, the first house, definitely how we navigate the world. And then the sixth house is associated with health or daily routines, and specifically physical health. Mental health ends up in a different place, but yeah. So when I think about physical rest, I think about first and sixth houses. And then we go back to the modes and the elements. What sign rules your first and sixth house? Is it a fixed sign or fixed sign, mutable sign, cardinal sign? And what does that mean in terms of gifts and challenges being able to rest? And then what element are those first and sixth house signs in? What element are they in? And then how can we decrease or increase the energy in terms of like activating or resting? And I'll give you an example of my sixth house. And how we synthesize this kind of information. So sixth house, health, daily routines, the body. My sixth house is in Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign, so it's next to last on the element hierarchy of energy, right? So probably better at resting than other signs. It's also a fixed sign, so inertia of some sort. In my life, it is the inertia of having difficult time starting a fitness and movement journey, but also being really good at rest and maintaining rest. So the inertia of being a body at rest. I will also say that Taurus is ruled by Venus. So yeah, it's also important to know the planetary rulers. I should have talked about that earlier as well. But Venus is very much an experience of the senses, or at least Venus as manifested in an earth sign. It's about sensory information. So a lot of my experience of rest is going to need to be rooted in turning off or turning down sensory input. What is it like to be in dim lighting, to be in a quiet setting, to have materials that feel soothing instead of energizing and enervating? Yeah, those kind of experiences. So yeah, this is why I'm putting together the idea of the mode, the element, a little bit about the planet, and understanding the area of life that we're looking at so that I can understand the full picture of how I would rest. I feel like I have seen other astrologers talk about this, and they're like, oh, whatever your sun sign is. But I think that is a start to a potential way of dealing with this issue or looking at this issue. But if we're looking at it more holistically, what is the mode? What is the element? What is the planetary ruler? So yeah, that is what I'm thinking about. That's an example of like physical rest and understanding what you need to do physical rest. Looking at your first and sixth house, what modes those signs come in, what elements, maybe even the planetary ruler. Moving on, number 2, mental rest. I would associate that with the third house, because the third house has to do with the ways that we think, what we think about, our thought processes, ideas, belief systems to a lesser extent. And so, yeah, when you're thinking about mental rest there, how can you bring the energy down? If you have in third house in a fire sign like Aries, that is cardinal fire, ruled by Mars. So yes, the cardinal energy being able to start a lot of projects that are idea-based, communication-based. And how do you get your mental rest? Can you divorce yourself from any sort of guilt about the fact that you aren't constantly starting an idea or coming up with new ideas? Can you think about bringing the energy down from fire to air, perhaps like doing some breathing exercises? Can you bring the energy down from fire to earth by going for like maybe a long walk? Can you bring the energy down from fire to water, even by taking a bath or having a nice cup of tea, which would combine water and earth energy? So yeah, some things to think about in terms of mental rest in the third house. Emotional rest, I would associate with both the 8th house and the 4th house. I feel like the 8th house is more obvious in that is the place of like deep emotional feelings that we sort of keep hidden from the world, and also maybe shadow work, sorts of emotional level stuff. But I think the 4th house as well, in that's also a place that we keep private. It's the place where we feel home. It's the place where we feel a sense of nurturing. And so what does emotional rest look like if we're looking at the sign on the 4th house or the sign on the 8th house? Again, I'll give a different example. Say you have Scorpio on your 4th house. Scorpio is a fix, so inertia. I feel like when I've seen folks with Scorpio 4th houses before, sometimes they can be stuck in the emotional depths, stuck in maybe some sadness. And so what are some ways that you could rest? Because when I'm thinking about fixed energy, I'm thinking about being committed to a thing, or the inertia, feeling of inertia. And so when I'm thinking about resting one's emotional self with a Scorpio 4th house, I think about understanding that there might be some inertia at play and that you might feel emotionally stuck, and moving those emotions around. You could go a couple of different ways. Scorpio is a water sign, so it's at its lowest state already. So I would think actually about raising the vibration, possibly getting into nature to get some earth energy, possibly raising the vibration to air by talking to a friend or jotting down some things in journaling. Maybe even raising the vibration by getting some fire energy. Maybe you do some dancing. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to be like moving your body as a form of rest. But I think if you have this particular combination of, fixed water energy, that it might be more useful. Even though it seems like it's counterintuitive, raising the vibration here could be a form of emotional rest. So yeah, I think that's everything I want to say about emotional rest. Yeah. Sensory rest is the next sort of topic that I want to talk about. And when I think about sensory experiences, I think again about the 6th house, because that's health and daily routines. But I also think about 3rd house, a combination between the 3rd house and the 6th house, because the 3rd house is so mental landscape driven. And so many of our sensory experiences are based on the ways in which our brains are set up. And so, yeah, being able to get a sensory rest, I would look at some experiences of what's going on in your 3rd house and possibly what's going on in your 6th house. Yeah, the idea of creative rest. And once again, understanding, I would associate creative rest with the 5th house. Understanding the mode, element, and maybe planetary ruler of whatever you have going on in your 5th house might give you a clue as to how you do creative rest. Let's do the example of Sagittarius on the 5th house. Sagittarius is a mutable fire sign, so it's going to go with the flow of energy, so that's good, but it's going to have a lot of energy, and so creativity may be the experience of a lot of different creative projects executed at a high energy level and moving from creative project to creative project because of that fire energy. And so getting to a place of rest in that context might look like, again, bringing it down from fire energy to air energy somehow. Maybe instead of executing the projects, we're just writing and thinking about the projects, or maybe we even bring it down to the earth level of things. Maybe we engage our senses and just do sensory play instead of taking on another creative project. Or maybe we are doing water. Maybe we are just resting and soaking our feet, and not taking the action on yet another creative project. Whereas for someone else with like maybe a Cancer 5th house, that would be cardinal water. And so we've already got the energy at the lowest place that it can be. And so what creative rest for a 5th house Cancer is actually increasing the vibe, going on a walk in nature, getting into that earth energy so that you can sort of activate some of the creativity. Because water is often so associated with creativity because it is constantly going with the flow and connecting to ideas and art and beauty and all of those things. And so, yeah, changing the vibe might be a form of rest. And even though it sounds counterintuitive to be increasing the energy, that might be necessary for a 5th house Cancer. And then there's also the idea of social rest. What does it mean to do social rest? I would look at the 11th house for that. And once again, whatever sign you have on the 11th house and whatever element and mode that comes in. For me, it's Libra. And so social rest can be like the idea of, because Libra is a cardinal air sign, a lot of times social rest for me looks like just being in nature and not necessarily connecting to other people, so air energy. So yeah, that's something. And then the last one is spiritual rest, which I would associate with the 12th house, because 12th house is actually is called the house of spirit. And so when I think about spiritual rest, I think once again about what mode you have, what sign you have there, what mode is that sign, and what element is that sign. And I'll give the example of like an Aries 12th house, which is a lot of energy. It's cardinal fire energy. And so spiritual rest might be about connecting to the earth, It could be about connecting to water energy, and moving your energy around, your spiritual energy around in that way. Does that make sense? Let me know if this makes sense to you, or if you have comments or ideas about other videos. I hope that I explained that well. But yeah, I wanted to break it down in that way because I wanted us to understand these things more holistically instead of being like, you have to do this in order to rest. It's so specific to your chart and the elements, the planetary rulers, the modes. So yeah, and how these things are all fitting together. At any rate, that's the video. That's all I got. Thank you for watching, and thank you as always for making time for queer astrology. Get some rest.